Toffler says that the illiterate of the 21st century is not one who cannot read or write. The illiterate of the 21st century is one who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. My name is Rosemary Mangope, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the National Arts Council of South Africa. There is an effort to reintegrate me back into the organization. I call it a reintegration because an absence of 8 months is rather significant. In terms of the impact, currently, I think it has begun to instill a sense of stability back into the organization. You know, any allegation of any sort causes uncertainty in any entity. And the sadness about this kind of disciplinary hearing that has a tendency to take such a long time, because it was that important, has got also a ripple effect of destabilizing the stuff. So for me, it's not just about me, it is about the impact that it has on the reputation of the National Arts Council, and above everything else, how it begins to tarnish the image of an entity that we've worked so hard to preserve. It has not been easy, but I am vindicated and I am very glad that that process is over. In the second phase of being back at the National Arts Council on my second 5-year contract, I aim to grow leaders. In the past, I was very focused on setting a trend and a tone for the organization, but now, this time around, my aim is to grow leaders, and I have already identified champions that I can work with within the entity, and we have discussed this. We have endless discussions these days, and communication is now the core of the entity in terms of that being the cornerstone of what drives the organization. What I also believe I did not do right the first time was I really did not engage that much with the rest of the organization. I depended too much on my managers to actually deal with everybody else within the sections, and I thought that staff meetings once a month were enough. I'm now very clear, staff meetings once a month are not enough. So what I'm doing differently now is that I have meetings directly with the different units within the entity. A lot of these allegations stem from one particular person, and this person was not given grant funding because he did not meet the criteria, and because he did not actually submit all the documents, and because I have never actually during this entire time came out and told my story. Everybody's just assuming that this one portion is what the truth is. But the reality and the truth is, we deal with a lot of complex beneficiaries, a lot of whom, once they have not met criteria, become disgruntled or are not truthful enough to say, we did not comply, therefore that is why we did not actually get funding from the National Arts Council. We need to deal with that. How we will do that is to be better at communicating the outcomes of our funding approvals, and also educating our stakeholders and our beneficiaries to understand more of the processes that are involved, and actually doing a preliminary check of whether people meet criteria once they have been adjudicated upon and they have been found as potential beneficiaries. So these checks must actually be done upfront instead of post the funding, and I think those will solve issues much better. We enhanced our strategy, and we're able to move from discipline-specific funding to programmatic funding. What it means is the National Arts Council, in terms of its act, exists in order to grant funding, but also promote and develop the artists. And what we have done was we were very good at just grant funding, but we haven't actually put in a lot of effort on developing and promoting. We also realized that to be discipline specific in this current era of the arts is totally irrelevant, because there is so much multidisciplinarity taking place in the arts. What we chose to do was to look at a programmatic approach. So what this means is that in terms of the new strategy, what we managed to do well was to relook at our goals and restate them in terms of the programmatic approach. I'll give you an example of what the programs are. We have programs like social cohesion and nation building. Now, clearly, the minute I say that, it already tells you that there's something that we're doing that is akin to what the government is doing, which is social cohesion and nation building. And by design, it would say that program would actually be funding people that bring the work to us that has inclusivity, that has belonging, that has social justice, that fit the criteria of what social cohesion and nation building ought to be. So that's one of the programs. Another program is innovation, creativity, and design. We live in the fourth industrial revolution, and I know that we probably will talk about it later, but safe to say, when we have a program that talks to innovation, creativity, and design, it already tells you that we are willing to be giving beneficiaries that will present work that is innovative, present work that will speak to creative industries, and present work that can actually have legs into the future. And so by design, that particular program begins to usher in our support for things that are happening in the Internet of Things. Another program is capacity building. Now, capacity building in South Africa is one of those terms that have just been so abused. Everything is capacity building. What we mean by that is we need to look at our beneficiaries and assist them in getting to a different level from which they came in. So in other words, it's not just about teaching skills, it's also about beneficiating the work that the artists do and getting the artists to get to a point of sustainability. That's what capacity building defined for us means. So it also needs to be understood that as a national entity, we cannot be funding everyone. So when we talk about supporting the development of the artists, we're not talking about the National Arts Council doing this on its own. And our strategy promotes collaborative strategy execution. What this means is that it recognizes that anything that we do in terms of implementing a strategy can only be done successfully if we collaborate with others. So partnerships are a key tool to actually implementing a strategy. So when it comes to capacity building, our interest is in working with structures in terms of local government, but also structures like community arts centers, where most of the people would be going in order for entry-level development. We should be funding community arts centers so that they become our partners when it comes to development. Our role is to actually fund excellence, because the idea is that we would then be going through our partners to reveal, unleash, and find talent that we then can put on the world stage as this is what South African talent looks like. We haven't done that very well. And this is something that we need to do when we talk about capacity building and development of the arts. Another program that we have is strategic initiatives. Now, very often we'd be doing what we have planned, but life happens. And things also happen in any country that then require all of us as citizens to rally around what the country needs to do. Invariably, we need to be having a fund that will support those kinds of strategic initiatives. Let's say we have an Ebola outbreak. We should be able to have funding that'll get our artists to actually produce work that informs, that communicates, that frames, that's structures that kind of initiative to rally around. So what I mean is that strategic initiatives are very unexpected, in the sense that by their very nature, they would be supporting a strategy, but it's very difficult to know what they look like going in. Funding is never enough, which is why it would be great if we could have partners like the Lotto that can actually come in, because our processes are beyond reproach, our processes are there. And we've actually moved away from manual processes to electronic processes in keeping with the fourth industrial revolution. But the beauty about electronic processes is they have a tendency of reducing the human error. So once you have inputted correct information electronically, then it's hard to fidget with that kind of information, which is why it is so important for the National Arts Council to move away from just hard documents and into electronic documents. First of all, it also gives the applicant the comfort of knowing that once you click and you send your application through and we acknowledge it, we have actually received it. Previously, we had a lot of issues around the acknowledgement of people's applications and so forth. So ushering in this kind of electronic tool affords our beneficiaries to receive information and also to ask in real time questions, should they actually have any while they're applying. So we're hoping to drive this more and more and grow it even more and more. We live in what is described as a VUCA world, VUCA. Now, the VUCA world stands for volatile, the U stands for ambiguous, the U stands for uncertain, and the C stands for complex, and the A stands for ambiguous. We need to shift the volatility to vision. We need to shift the uncertainty to understanding. We need to shift the complexity to clarity, and we need to shift the ambiguity to agility. So what this means is that we need to always be on the forefront of driving change. A lot of the problems that we find is that the provincial structures either are not fully functional, or there's a lot of infighting and conflict in them, and it doesn't allow us a vehicle to actually work seamlessly through when we work with provincial arts councils. So what is it that we're going to put in place is that we need to work much more closer with provincial structures in order to define what can work better, and to identify and share the problems that we have experienced as a national entity, and begin to see what other solutions are out there provincially that we can work through. Now, a typical example is we don't necessarily have to work through a provincial arts council. There are entities that exist in provinces that are doing extremely well, and they're doing good work, and their governance systems are in place, and they're able to report. We ought to be looking at identifying more of those types of structures instead of just being dependent on provincial arts councils. They are an important body, but if they're dysfunctional, nothing stops us from identifying other entities that we can work with. Now, it's very difficult to try and impose yourself onto provincial structures. So it's the provincial structures, not necessarily the arts councils, but the province working through the provincial, administration, to try and begin to influence the governance, and starting from the nomination process of who serves in these kinds of structures. Because the other problem is that the people that are in the leadership of a provincial arts council do not necessarily have the fortitude or the technical proficiency to be driving this kind of entity, and that's why you have these kinds of conflicts and infighting. So our ability to say what is the ideal model of who should serve, or what is the ideal character or characteristic of a member that should be serving in the provincial arts council structure that needs to be leading the way, becomes very important. So I realize that we may need to begin to develop these models and develop them shaped by our experience of working with the ones that did not work that well. When we say we are now funding for impact, the instruments that we have used in order to measure have really been weak. So to this end, we have actually partnered, and I'm pleased to say, with the government school. So the National Government School. We have partnered with them in order to help us to design tools and to go through courses of monitoring and evaluation. In fact, when I had a meeting with them, they were clear that the timing has been great because the 6th administration has just introduced a new framework of checking and monitoring strategies and annual performance plans. So now that we've partnered with the government schools, we would be in a position to begin to measure impact properly. We haven't done very well in terms of people living with disabilities. One of the things that I really wanted to implement before I went on leave was to find strategic partners that we could partner with in terms of working with people with disabilities. And what we wanted to do for the Nelson Mandela year was to actually fund an initiative that will be ran, performed, and even back office being done by people living with disabilities. And we were in the process of negotiating with Artscape, Malin Leroux, who herself is living with a disability, to partner with us in order to do this huge initiative that is actually an offering that is done purely by people living with disabilities. One of the successes, though, I have to name is that we have worked with companies like From the Hip, Kulumagahle, who are people that are dealing with people that have hearing disabilities. And now, do you know that it's very difficult to train somebody that is signing a theater piece? And the idea is to begin to produce sign language people that are able to sign theater pieces. If you think about it, if you're a family and you have a child that's got a hearing disability, it changes where you choose to go as a family. It means as a family you cannot go to theater and enjoy theater as a family. So one of the offerings of working with From the Hip Kulumagahle was to train sign language people to be able to also sign for theater, because signing for theater is a different skill. So that's one of the successes, for example, in putting an initiative of working with people living with disabilities. We can do more, clearly, and I think we will be able to find more that we have funded that I cannot think about currently, but those we could avail. But it's an area of growth for us. As far as youth at risk is concerned, I think we've done well in the sense that a lot of the beneficiaries that have applied have actually applied on the ticket of youth, and particularly youth at risk. So that statistic we would be able to make available as well. When it comes on projects working with women, I think we've done well as well. We have quite a lot of women-led initiatives that we fund, and that too can be a statistic that we make available. Africa Meets Africa is a consortium of mathematicians, historians, visual artists, and English teachers. Now, one would never actually talk of all those groupings in one sentence, and yet here we are. And what we did is we supported this organization and funded them in order to produce teacher guides as well as student learning guides to teach history, mathematics, English, and visual arts. And what happened is we chose to follow Esther Mahlangu, the artist, and chose one particular painting of hers. Now the books, as will be illustrated, start with the illustrations of the Ndebele traditions. So that's the historical part. And it also details what the Ndebele are all about, what the meaning of these paintings are to the Ndebele people, the paints that are being used and so forth. And we use the same kind of painting to teach mathematics. When you think about it, a lot of the Ndebele paintings are very geometric. So we teach geometry with Esther Mahlangu's painting. But what is important is to begin to say, traditionally, a person like Esther Mahlangu would be somebody that's called illiterate, right? Because she has never been to school. And yet now she's got a PhD. Recognition. So what is so important is we need to be identifying more Esther Mahlangus of this world. And indigenous knowledge that resides in a lot of the Esther Mahlangus, and there are many of them. It's just that we're not finding them enough, and we ought to be finding, and there is lots of them. We are open for business. The National Arts Council is open for business, and we are innovating, we are discovering, we are cleaning up, we are enhancing, we are monitoring our steps in order to actually emerge with instruments that can help us work better and serve our beneficiaries better. To our partners, particularly our past beneficiaries, actually, I'd like to make a call to say, come join us on this journey. We're looking for you.